Most everyone who arrived at Auschwitz was murdered within less than an hour. No questions were asked, no explanations given. They were unloaded from the train, separated, and their fate decided in seconds. The elderly, children, and pregnant women were sent straight to their deaths. The rest were tattooed, shaved, and assigned to forced labor, medical experiments, or punishments. Every step followed a logic. The goal was to eliminate as many people as possible with the least expense. Executions happened daily. The ovens cremated thousands of bodies. If they couldn't keep up, pits were dug. The pace never stopped. Auschwitz wasn't an aberration. It was an official structure. It operated with planning, budgets, and clear hierarchies. It didn't function on the fringes of the system. It was central to it. Who designed that process? How did it stay operational for years without interruption? And why did so many carry it out, knowing exactly what they were doing? This documentary is for educational purposes and analyzes historical facts from a neutral perspective. It doesn't seek to glorify ideologies or incite hatred. This is the story of Auschwitz's design as a death machine. On April 30th, 1940, SS Captain Rudolf Höss reached a major milestone in his career. After 6 years of service, this 39-year-old officer was appointed commander of one of the first Nazi concentration camps in the newly conquered territories of Eastern Europe. That spring day, he arrived to take up his duties in a small town that, until 8 months earlier, had been part of southwestern Poland, now incorporated into German Upper Silesia. The Poles called this village Oświęcim, but the Germans renamed it Auschwitz. There was a catch. Although Höss had been promoted to commander, the camp he was supposed to lead didn't exist yet. He would have to oversee its construction from a set of dilapidated, parasite-infested barracks, formerly used by the Polish army, clustered around a horse-riding arena on the outskirts of the town. The surrounding area was even more depressing, flat, monotonous terrain with a damp, unhealthy climate. No one could have predicted that in 5 years, this camp would become the site of the largest mass murder in human history. Höss didn't look like the monster he would become. According to American lawyer Whitney Harris, who interrogated him during the Nuremberg trials, he seemed like an ordinary person, similar to a grocery store clerk. Several Auschwitz prisoners confirmed this impression, describing him as calm and controlled, the kind of person you might pass on the street without noticing. This unremarkable appearance made him even more terrifying. The 3 years Höss spent at Dachau concentration camp before his appointment at Auschwitz played a decisive role in shaping his character and career. At Dachau, he channeled the violence and hatred the Nazis felt toward their enemies into systems and order. Dachau was infamous for its physical sadism, where whippings and beatings were commonplace. Guards or even fellow prisoners could kill inmates in cold blood, and their deaths were always recorded as shot while trying to escape. But the real power of the regime at Dachau wasn't just in physical abuse, it was in psychological torture. The first innovation at Dachau was that, unlike a conventional prison, inmates had no idea how long their sentence would last. This uncertainty had profound psychological effects and was crucial for breaking prisoners' resistance. Guards played mind games instead of just inflicting physical punishment, even demonstrating how to tie a proper hangman's knot and then leaving the rope within reach, suggesting suicide as an option. At Dachau, Höss learned the SS philosophy of prisoner management, including the infamous kapo system, which would later play a significant role in Auschwitz. Authorities appointed a prisoner as kapo in each block or work unit, granting them enormous power over their peers. The kapo's main task was to ensure work quotas were met, ruthlessly pressuring other inmates. If SS guards were dissatisfied with the kapo's performance, they demoted him to ordinary prisoner status. When that happened, the other prisoners typically beat the former kapo to death on his first night back among them. Höss rose quickly at Dachau until April 1936, when he was named chief assistant to the camp commander. In September 1936, he was promoted to lieutenant and transferred to Sachsenhausen concentration camp, where he remained until his elevation to commander of the new Auschwitz camp. He arrived at his new post in the spring of 1940, deeply honored by the responsibility entrusted to him personally by Heinrich Himmler. Originally, Auschwitz was conceived as a quarantine camp, a place to hold prisoners before sending them to other Reich concentration camps. However, within days, it became clear that the camp would function as a permanent site of imprisonment. Its purpose was to incarcerate and terrorize Poles at a time when the entire country was being ethnically restructured. Even in its first incarnation as a concentration camp, Auschwitz had a proportionally higher death rate than any other normal Reich camp. Of the 20,000 Poles initially sent there, more than half were dead by early 1942. In September 1940, Oswald Pohl, head of the SS Main Administrative and Economic Office, inspected the camp and ordered Höss to expand its capacity. He explained that the SS would enter business, not as a capitalist enterprise, but as a series of companies operating on Nazi philosophical ideas in service to the state. Concentration camps would provide raw materials for the new Germany, like the vast amounts of granite needed for Hitler's gigantic new Reich Chancellery in Berlin. The transformation of Auschwitz from concentration camp to the deadliest extermination center began in 1941, following the invasion of the Soviet Union in June. The Nazi regime's policy toward Jews escalated from persecution to systematic murder. The war with the Soviet Union precipitated the most radical solution to what the Nazis called the Jewish problem: the destruction of the Soviet Jewish population through the shooting of men, women, and children. The implementation of what would become known as the final solution changed everything for Auschwitz. In December 1941, in a closed-door meeting with Heinrich Himmler, Hitler gave the order to exterminate all Jews by any means necessary. Using Himmler as an intermediary between himself and the final solution's implementation, Hitler ensured no documentary trail linked him directly to history's greatest crime. The final solution wasn't the Nazis' first option. In 1940, Himmler himself had written an article stating that mass murder of a people was fundamentally un-German. Initially, the Nazis wanted to deport Jews to a place as far from the Reich as possible. In 1940, they proposed the African island of Madagascar as a potential destination. This plan was abandoned as the war progressed, and by early 1941, Hitler ordered Reinhard Heydrich to prepare a scheme for deporting Jews to some German-controlled location. The war with the Soviet Union was expected to last only weeks, so Hitler and Heydrich planned to push Jews further east. That fall, as Nazi forces murdered Jews in the Soviet Union, SS officers often expressed discomfort at shooting women and children at point-blank range. In response to these protests and what he had witnessed himself, Himmler ordered a search for an execution method that caused fewer psychological issues for his men. Incredibly, one of the first methods the Nazis tried was explosion, placing mentally ill patients in a bunker with dynamite. They quickly learned that killing by explosion was impractical. The solution came during the summer of 1941 when Rudolf Höss learned of a gas called Zyklon B, used to kill insects near Auschwitz. Höss reasoned that if Zyklon B could kill lice, it could also eliminate human pests. Since Block 11 was already the execution site within the camp and its basement could be sealed, it was the natural location for the first experiment. With the newly built IG Farben production plant just 5 kilometers away, Höss could secure all the gas he needed almost instantly. By late 1941, as the final solution was underway, a completely new camp was built 3 kilometers from the existing one, on marshy ground the Poles called Brzezinka and the Germans Birkenau. Though Birkenau would eventually become the site of the largest mass murder of Jews in history, that wasn't its original purpose. Initially, Birkenau was conceived as a camp for prisoners of war captured during Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union. The task of designing and building the new camp fell to SS Captain Karl Bischoff, newly appointed head of Auschwitz construction office and an architect. From the start, it was obvious the planned facilities were inadequate to sustain human life. His initial plan stipulated that one barrack would house 550 prisoners, while at Dachau, a similar block could only hold 200. This meant prisoners at Auschwitz-Birkenau would be crammed like firewood into barracks, exposed to inhuman conditions. By late 1942, Auschwitz had evolved into a vast complex comprising 3 main camps. Auschwitz I, the main camp and administrative headquarters; Auschwitz II, Birkenau, the extermination center; and Auschwitz III-Monowitz, the labor camp supporting the IG Farben factory. These constructions turned Auschwitz-Birkenau into an impressive and deadly complex that became a crucial part of the Third Reich's killing machinery. Though orders came directly from Heinrich Himmler, the day-to-day operations and most innovations that distinguished Auschwitz from other extermination camps originated in Rudolf Höss's mind. Arrival and prisoner selection, the gateway to death. The journey to Auschwitz began long before the cattle cars arrived at the infamous ramp. For Jews across Europe, deportation orders marked the start of a terrible odyssey. On October 6th, my name appeared for deportation to the east, recalled one survivor. We didn't know where we were going. We were told we'd be transported east, where we'd work for the German Reich, probably in industrial areas. We had no idea we were headed to a concentration camp. Victims typically had just hours to pack a single suitcase with their belongings. They were instructed to bring valuables, work clothes, and essentials, a cruel deception, as most would be stripped of these possessions upon arrival. The Nazis maintained this facade of resettlement to the end, issuing official-looking documents, travel tickets, and even charging resettlement fees to their victims. The deportation trains were true instruments of torture. Freight cars designed for livestock were crammed with 80 to 100 people, with no seats, minimal ventilation, and often just one bucket for sanitary needs. It was the hottest day I can remember in my life, recalled a Dutch survivor. We were all packed like sardines, bodies burning hot. I remember telling my wife, if I don't come back, you can remarry, find a husband who's good to the baby. We were thinking about the child, nothing else, but we were very scared. These journeys could last days or even weeks. Many passengers, especially the elderly and young children, died en route from dehydration, suffocation, or illness. Bodies remained wedged among the living until the doors finally opened at Auschwitz. When the trains arrived at the Judenrampe, Jewish ramp, or later the specially built rail spur leading directly into Birkenau, passengers emerged disoriented, exhausted, and desperate for fresh air. What greeted them was a scene of controlled chaos. Wagon doors were flung open amid shouts of "Raus! Raus! Out! Out!" SS guards with dogs and whips ordered prisoners to leave all belongings and form separate lines of men and women. And there went my wife and the baby. We were told we'd see our families every Sunday, every weekend. It wasn't true. It never happened. The selection process on the ramp was the critical moment determining immediate life or death. SS doctors, including the infamous Joseph Mengele, directed newcomers with a flick of the finger or a gesture. Those sent to the right became registered prisoners, assigned a number, and put to work. Those directed left, typically the elderly, children under 14, pregnant women, the visibly weak or disabled, were sent straight to the gas chambers. The entire selection process usually took no more than seconds per person. SS doctors made these life or death decisions not based on medical evaluations, but on apparent work capacity. During the arrival of Hungarian Jews in 1944, when trains came daily, selections became even more superficial, with up to 70 to 75% of each transport sent directly to the gas chambers. Kitty Hart-Moxon, who was 15 when she arrived at Birkenau, witnessed the entire extermination process from her barrack. Mine was a very quick block overlooking the gas chambers and crematorium 4. You could see what was happening. It was incredible to actually watch hundreds and thousands of people arriving right in front of me, separated by an electrified fence, and not be able to communicate. Communicating with those people was forbidden. The Nazis maintained an elaborate deception to prevent panic or resistance among those selected for immediate death. Victims were told they were going to shower before entering the camp, a plausible explanation after their long journey. The SS created beautifully landscaped gardens along the path from the trains to the gas chambers, and the crematoria themselves were hidden behind a wall of birch trees. Many were sitting in the woods. There are lots of woods there, just waiting to go into the gas chambers because they had no idea, recalled Hart-Moxon. People didn't know. They thought they were going for a shower. They were told over loudspeakers that they were going to shower, so they were lulled into a false sense of security. For those selected for work, a different horror awaited. They were led to processing centers where they were stripped of their last possessions and their identity. Heads were shaved, they were disinfected with harsh chemicals that burned their skin, and they were given striped prison uniforms. Significantly, they were tattooed with identification numbers, marking the complete erasure of their individual humanity in the Nazi system. Prisoners received colored triangles to sew onto their uniforms: red for political prisoners, green or purple for criminals, brown for Roma, pink for homosexuals, black for asocials, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Jews wore a yellow Star of David. Initially, tattoos weren't placed on prisoners' arms, but pierced into their chests with long needles. The resulting wound was filled with ink to aid identification, especially when dead inmates were found around the camp. No one was exempt from selection. Periodically, selections occurred in the barracks, where prisoners too weak to work were removed and sent to the gas chambers. A Dutch survivor recalled one such selection. I remember the day of the big selection, a large barrack full of naked men, 2 tables at the front, at each table an SS man, and we had to walk toward the 2 tables. Behind me is Eddie Hayon, a professional footballer from Ajax Amsterdam. He says, "I have an abscess in my mouth and I don't know what's going to happen. We had to line up completely naked and walk in front of them. We all had to stand upright, chest out, and show them how wonderfully we could walk in front of them and smile at them to show, 'I'm fine, don't select me.' Because we knew that when you were selected, you were gone, you didn't live anymore." The line moves forward. I'm near the 2 tables. I walk between the 2 tables, and the SS directs me to the right. As I walk away, I look back thinking Eddie Heyman will come behind me. They direct him to the left, and I never saw Eddie Heyman again. He was gassed because of the abscess in his mouth. The selection process was the gateway to 2 different fates in Auschwitz: immediate death in the gas chambers, or a slower death through forced labor, starvation, disease, and eventual selection when one became too weak to work. For the few lucky survivors, the memory of that first selection on the ramp, the moment that separated them from loved ones they'd never see again, remained one of the most traumatic experiences of their ordeal. The gas chambers of Auschwitz represent the ultimate perversion of human ingenuity. Principles of technology and design applied not to improve life, but to end it with maximum efficiency. The evolution of these extermination facilities reflects the Nazi regime's methodical approach to mass murder, transforming what started as improvised operations into industrialized killing on an unprecedented scale. The first experimental gassing at Auschwitz took place in the basement of Block 11 in September 1941. The victims were Soviet POWs and sick Polish prisoners. After this successful test, the main camp's crematorium was adapted by adding a gas chamber, but its killing capacity was limited. As the final solution accelerated, Nazi leadership demanded more efficient facilities. In Birkenau, the first improvised gas chambers were operational by March 1942. They were housed in two converted farmhouses that prisoners called the Little Red House and the Little White House, known to the SS as Bunker 1 and 2. The brick houses' windows had been bricked up and their rooms turned into sealed chambers with signs reading "disinfection" on the doors. When Heinrich Himmler visited the camp on July 17th to 18th, 1942, he observed the selection of Dutch Jews being murdered in the Bunker 2 gas chamber. Impressed by this method of extermination, Himmler approved the expansion of Auschwitz's killing facilities. The limited capacity of these initial chambers drove the construction of 4 large crematoria, numbered 2 through 5, in Birkenau between March and June 1943. These were purpose-built for mass murder. Crematoria, 2 and 3 each, contained an underground undressing room and gas chamber, plus a ground-level furnace room with multiple cremation ovens. Crematoria 4 and 5 were smaller facilities with gas chambers and furnace rooms at ground level. The gas chambers were disguised as showers, complete with fake shower heads to maintain the deception. Victims were told they needed to shower for hygienic reasons after their journey. Once inside, doors were sealed with airtight locks. As personnel climbed onto the roof or accessed a side opening to drop Zyklon B pellets into the chamber through specially designed columns or vents. Zyklon B was hydrogen cyanide absorbed into a carrier material originally developed as a pesticide. When exposed to air, it released lethal cyanide gas. In the warm, crowded gas chambers, death came in 10 to 20 minutes, though the process was agonizing. Witnesses described hearing muffled screams and banging on doors as victims realized their fate. "I actually saw them being led into the gas chamber, groups of people," recalled Kitty Hart Moxon. "You actually saw the men putting the gas in. There was a skylight on top of the gas chamber, and there was always a man, sometimes in green uniforms, sometimes in disinfection gear, climbing up the ladder and emptying a can of these gas crystals into the skylight. A few minutes later, you could hear people dying, screaming. The sounds were muffled, and that would last up to 20 minutes. Then, the next thing you'd see was fire and smoke coming out of the chimney." After the gassing, members of the Sonderkommando, special squads of Jewish prisoners forced to work in the crematoria, entered the chambers wearing gas masks to remove the bodies. They cut women's hair and extracted gold teeth or hidden valuables from corpses before cremation. Sonderkommando workers also operated the cremation ovens, where multiple bodies were burned together to save fuel. When ovens couldn't keep pace with the killings, bodies were burned in open pits behind the crematoria. The 4 new crematoria in Birkenau had a combined theoretical capacity to kill and cremate over 4,400 people per day, though in practice, they often exceeded this. At the height of the Hungarian deportations in 1944, up to 12,000 people were killed daily. The enormous scale of killing during this period overwhelmed even Birkenau's industrial facilities. This aerial reconnaissance photo from August 25, 1944, shows a large column of smoke rising from the area behind Crematorium 5, where bodies were burned in open pits. The design of Auschwitz gas chambers and crematoria reflected meticulous planning and technical innovation. Architects and engineers applied principles of efficiency, workflow, and capacity as if designing a factory or slaughterhouse. The underground gas chambers in crematoria 2 and 3 featured ventilation systems to expel poisonous gas after killings and introduce fresh air, allowing quicker turnaround for the next group of victims. Elevators transported bodies to the upper floor cremation ovens. Buildings were laid out for one-way flow. Victims entered, were killed, and their remains processed and disposed of in a sequential process designed for maximum efficiency. This industrialized approach to murder is what made Auschwitz unique. Other extermination camps like Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec used carbon monoxide from engine exhaust for their gas chambers, a less efficient method. Auschwitz's use of Zyklon B, combined with its purpose-built facilities, created a death factory capable of operating continuously for years. Victims' remains weren't just cremated, they were exploited. The Nazis recycled human hair, dental gold, and even ashes. Women's hair was sent to German factories for use in felt, ropes, and textiles. Gold teeth were melted down and sent to the Reichsbank. Some ashes were used as fertilizer on nearby SS-operated farms. In January 1945, as Soviet forces approached Auschwitz, the SS tried to destroy evidence of their crimes, dismantling crematoria, blowing them up with dynamite, and burning documents. However, ruins of these extermination facilities remained, and Soviet forces documented them extensively after liberation. Today, the preserved remnants of crematoria 2, 3, 4, and 5 stand as evidence of industrialized mass murder, a brick and concrete testament to the mechanized extermination of human beings on an unprecedented scale. Auschwitz's gas chambers and crematoria represent the endpoint of a process that began with discrimination and segregation, progressed through deportation, and culminated in industrial-scale murder. They are the physical manifestation of the final solution, the ultimate expression of the Nazi state's systematic application of modern industrial methods to the task of exterminating an entire people. Amid the systematic extermination at Auschwitz, another form of atrocity unfolded under the guise of medical research. SS doctors, led by the infamous Joseph Mengele, conducted cruel experiments on prisoners, twisting medical science into an instrument of torture and murder. These experiments, performed without anesthesia, ethical restraints, or scientific validity, represented some of the most depraved acts in medical history. Joseph Mengele, known as the Angel of Death, has become synonymous with medical atrocities at Auschwitz. He arrived at the camp just as Birkenau's crematoria were completed, and Auschwitz was entering its most destructive period. With his medical training and specialized interest in genetics and hereditary biology, Mengele saw Auschwitz as a unique opportunity to advance his research through unlimited access to human subjects. Mengele showed particular interest in twins, whom he believed could provide insights into heredity. When new transports arrived at Auschwitz, Mengele personally oversaw selections, specifically seeking twins among the deportees. Twin children were nothing but guinea pigs for Mengele, noted one account. Every time he received news that twin children had been brought to the camp, he demanded that no one touch them except himself. His experiments on twins included taking physical measurements, drawing blood, injecting various substances, and performing unnecessary surgeries. In many cases, when one twin died from an experiment or illness, Mengele immediately killed the other with a heart injection to conduct comparative autopsies. In his research notes, Mengele never admitted causing the second twin's death, instead claiming he was lucky both children died at the same time. One of Mengele's supposed goals was to find ways to boost the German birth rate by understanding the biological mechanisms of multiple births. Some experiments involved attempts to create artificial twins by sewing children together, often without anesthesia. Others included injecting dyes into children's eyes to see if their color could be changed to match the Aryan ideal of blue eyes. Beyond twins, Mengele was fascinated by physical anomalies, collecting dwarfs and people with deformities, conducting painful tests, and eventually preserving their bodies or skeletons for study. He also took interest in a facial gangrene known as noma, common in Birkenau's Roma camp due to appalling conditions. Many of his test subjects died during experiments or ended up horribly disfigured. Other SS doctors at Auschwitz conducted equally horrific experiments. Karl Klauberg performed mass sterilization experiments, particularly on Jewish and Roma women, injecting irritants into their cervixes without anesthesia, causing extreme pain, inflammation, and often death. His aim was to develop an efficient sterilization method to prevent inferior races from reproducing. SS Dr. Horst Schumann conducted X-ray sterilization experiments on men and women. After intense radiation exposure targeted at their reproductive organs, victims suffered severe burns and complications. Many died from these procedures or were later killed so their reproductive organs could be removed and examined. Prisoners were also subjected to experiments studying the effects of starvation, extreme cold, and infectious diseases. In hypothermia experiments, prisoners were forced to stand outdoors in freezing temperatures or submerged in icy water until unconscious, supposedly to develop better treatments for downed German pilots in the North Sea. Victims of these experiments rarely survived. Some prisoners were deliberately infected with diseases like typhus, tuberculosis, and malaria, so doctors could test experimental treatments or observe disease progression. Others underwent experimental surgical procedures, often by inexperienced SS doctors practicing their skills. What made these experiments particularly horrific wasn't just the physical pain inflicted, but the complete dehumanization of the victims. SS doctors viewed prisoners not as humans, but as disposable research material. Survivors reported that Mengele could be charming with children, bringing them sweets and treats, earning the nickname Uncle Mengele among some child prisoners. This facade of kindness made his brutal experiments even more psychologically devastating. One of the most disturbing aspects of Auschwitz medical atrocities was that they were carried out by trained physicians who had taken the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm. Many of these doctors had been respected members of Germany's medical establishment before the war. Their willingness to abandon all ethical principles shows how Nazi ideology corrupted science and medicine, turning healers into perpetrators of torture and murder. Unlike the gas chambers, which killed anonymously and en masse, medical experiments represented a more intimate form of atrocity. Doctors knew their victims' names, saw their faces, and often developed relationships with them over weeks or months, while subjecting them to indescribable suffering. This personalized cruelty reveals a particularly disturbing facet of the Nazi system: the ability of educated professionals to directly participate in sadistic acts while maintaining a self-image as scientists advancing knowledge. After the war, some Nazi doctors were prosecuted during the doctors' trial in Nuremberg from 1946 to 1947. However, many escaped justice. Mengele fled to South America, where he reportedly lived until his death in 1979 without ever facing accountability for his crimes. His evasion became a symbol of the imperfect reckoning with Nazi atrocities in the post-war era. The medical experiments at Auschwitz raise profound questions about scientific and medical ethics that continue to resonate today. They directly led to the creation of the Nuremberg Code for Research Ethics and influenced modern informed consent requirements for medical research. The horrific legacy of Nazi doctors serves as a permanent reminder of the need for ethical boundaries in science and the dangers of dehumanizing those society deems other. Beyond the industrial-scale murder in the gas chambers, Auschwitz was a place of deliberate, individualized cruelty. The camp's punishment system was designed not just to torture and kill, but to terrorize the prisoner population through public spectacles and psychological torment. Block 11 in the main camp, known to prisoners as the Death Block, was the epicenter of this punishment and execution system. From the outside, Block 11 resembled the other red brick barrack buildings lined up in straight rows across the camp. But it served a unique and grim purpose as a prison within a prison, a site of torture and murder that made every prisoner dread even walking nearby. Inside Block 11, prisoners endured various tortures. A common method was hanging inmates from ceiling beams with hands tied behind their backs until they lost all feeling in their bodies. During winter, guards held prisoners' heads against hot stoves, causing severe burns and permanent disfigurement. Many victims lost their eyesight after a single session in Block 11. In the camp's early days, Block 11 was the domain of SS Second Lieutenant Max Grabner, one of the most notorious staff members. Before joining the SS, Grabner had been a cowboy, but at Auschwitz, he wielded life-and-death power over prisoners. Each week, he cleaned the bunker, deciding each prisoner's fate in Block 11. Some would remain in their cells, but for others, he wrote a number on their penal reports. One meant flogging or other torture, while two meant immediate execution. Those condemned to death were first taken to the ground floor washrooms in Block 11 and ordered to strip naked. Once nude, they were led through a side door to an isolated courtyard between Blocks 10 and 11, known as the Death Wall or Black Wall. This courtyard was walled off from the rest of the camp so no one could witness the executions. Prisoners were positioned against the far brick wall from the block entrance, and an SS executioner held a small-caliber pistol to the back of their head and pulled the trigger. Public hangings were another form of punishment designed to terrorize the entire camp population. The gallows stood permanently in the roll call square, where all prisoners assembled twice daily for counting. When executions were scheduled, the whole camp was forced to watch. One of the most notorious mass executions occurred on July 19, 1943, when 12 Polish prisoners were hanged simultaneously for aiding others escape. The condemned were made to stand on stools that were then kicked away, leaving them to strangle slowly rather than experience the quicker death of a drop hanging. Another punishment was confinement in standing cells, specially designed chambers in Block 11's basement, measuring about 1 square meter. 4 prisoners were crammed into this tiny space, forced to enter through a small opening near the floor, with barely room to stand and no possibility to sit or lie down. Prisoners remained in these cells for days, often emerging unable to walk or suffering permanent physical damage. The starvation bunker was perhaps the most feared punishment cell. Prisoners were placed in a sealed cell with no food or water and left to die. It was in such a cell that Saint Maximilian Kolbe, a Polish Catholic priest, died after volunteering to take the place of a man selected for this punishment. Kolbe survived 2 weeks before being finally killed with a carbolic acid injection. Floggings were routine punishments administered publicly to deter rule violations. Prisoners were bent over a special table designed for the purpose and beaten with a leather whip. SS regulations specified that prisoners could receive up to 25 lashes at a time, though in practice this limit was often exceeded. Victims frequently died from injuries sustained during these floggings or were left so badly wounded that they were later selected for the gas chambers. The SS devised special punishments for escape attempts. When a prisoner escaped, their entire work group or barrack might be forced to stand at attention for hours or days without food or water, regardless of weather conditions. If the fugitive was recaptured, they were publicly executed, often in especially cruel ways to deter others. Some were drowned in water barrels, others crucified, and others slowly strangled with wires. Family members of the prisoner in the camp could also be killed in retaliation. Female prisoners at Auschwitz faced similar brutality, particularly at the hands of female SS guards. At Ravensbrück concentration camp, where female guards were trained before being sent to Auschwitz, Heinrich Himmler had personally authorized the Prügelstrafe, beating punishment for women. Prisoners were made to bend over a horse-like structure while guards, or sometimes other prisoners under orders, administered a specified number of lashes. Women who violated camp rules or were suspected of resistance activities could be sent to the SK, Strafkompanie, or Punishment Company, where they performed the most physically demanding labor on reduced rations. Many died from exhaustion within weeks. The psychological impact of these public punishments extended far beyond their physical toll. By forcing the entire camp population to witness brutality against fellow prisoners, the SS created an atmosphere of terror and helplessness. The message was clear. Resistance was futile, and even minor infractions would be met with extreme violence. Yet despite this reign of terror, acts of resistance continued throughout Auschwitz's existence. Prisoners formed underground networks to share information, smuggle medicine, and even plan escapes. The most dramatic act of resistance occurred on October 7, 1944, when Sonderkommando members organized an uprising using explosives smuggled by women working in an armaments factory. They managed to kill several SS guards and partially destroy Crematorium 4 before being overwhelmed. All participants in the uprising were killed, along with many other prisoners suspected of involvement. The punishment and execution systems at Auschwitz reveal that, beyond the industrialized murder of the gas chambers, the camp functioned as a place of deliberate cruelty and terror. Through public executions, specialized torture, and collective punishment, the SS created an environment where death wasn't just the end result. It was a constant, looming threat used to crush resistance and humanity among the prisoners forced to exist within the barbed wire of this man-made hell. On January 27, 1945, Soviet soldiers from the First Ukrainian Front liberated Auschwitz. What they found surpassed even the horrors they had witnessed during years of brutal combat on the Eastern Front. Soviet soldiers described what they encountered in those filthy barracks as living skeletons. They even feared touching them, thinking they might accidentally kill them due to their extreme fragility. When the Soviets arrived, they found about 7,000 prisoners left behind in the camp complex. These were the weakest, those the SS deemed too sick to evacuate in the devastating death marches that had begun weeks earlier. Sensing imminent defeat in the Red Army's approach, the SS had ordered the evacuation of around 60,000 prisoners from Auschwitz to camps deeper in German territory. Thousands died during these forced marches in the brutal Polish winter cold. The first days of liberation were critical. On January 20, 1945, just a week before Soviet troops arrived, the SS had received orders to exterminate the remaining population at Auschwitz. Over the next 7 days, special SS units murdered about 700 prisoners in Birkenau and nearby subcamps. Nearly 8,000 other prisoners escaped death because the Red Army was approaching Auschwitz too quickly, and SS members were more concerned with saving themselves than following orders. The process of documenting the crimes began immediately. Soviet photographers and cameramen filmed the camps extensively, capturing images of crowded barracks, mountains of belongings stolen from victims, and the remnants of extermination facilities the SS had tried to destroy before retreating. These visual records would provide crucial evidence for subsequent war crimes trials. The liberating forces, aided by the Polish Red Cross, worked to help survivors, organizing medical care and food. Red Army hospitals treated 4,500 survivors. It was an extremely difficult task, as many survivors were too weak to be moved and had to receive treatment on site. Even in June 1945, 300 survivors were still in the camp receiving medical care. As evidence of the crimes committed at Auschwitz mounted, the hunt for perpetrators began. Rudolf Höss, who had been transferred from Auschwitz in November 1943, was captured by British troops on March 11, 1946, at a farm near Flensburg where he was living under the name Franz Lang. During interrogation, Höss confessed to his role in the murder of over 1 million people at Auschwitz. Höss's testimony at the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg, where he served as a witness, provided chilling details about Auschwitz's operations and the final solution's implementation. His written confession, though sometimes inaccurate in specifics, confirmed the genocide's massive scale. "I commanded Auschwitz until December 1, 1943, and estimate that at least 2,500,000 victims were executed and exterminated there by gassing and burning, and at least another 500,000 succumbed to starvation and disease, making a total of about 3 million dead. This figure represents about 70 to 80% of all persons sent to Auschwitz as prisoners. Though later historians have revised these numbers downward, the current scholarly consensus places the number killed at Auschwitz at about 1.1 million. Höss's confession confirmed the systematic and deliberate nature of the murder. After testifying at Nuremberg, Höss was extradited to Poland for his own trial. On April 2, 1947, Poland's Supreme National Tribunal sentenced him to death. On April 16, 1947, he was hanged on a specially built gallows erected right next to the villa he had occupied as Auschwitz commander and the main camp's crematorium, where so many of his victims had been killed. Other Auschwitz staff members also faced trial. In total, about 700 of the 6,335 SS members who served at Auschwitz were prosecuted. The Auschwitz trials in Krakow, held from November 1947 to December 1948, resulted in 23 death sentences, 16 of which were carried out in 1947. The US government tried 9 IG Farben executives, including Otto Ambros, for war crimes related to slave labor at Auschwitz-Monowitz and the production of Zyklon B used in the gas chambers. Meanwhile, Joseph Mengele had escaped to Argentina. Despite an international manhunt, he was never captured and reportedly died by drowning in Brazil in 1979. In 2015, Oskar Gröning, known as the accountant of Auschwitz, was sentenced to 4 years in prison for his role as an SS guard at the camp. He was 94 at the time of his conviction, which was based on his complicity in the murder of 300,000 Jews during the 1944 Hungarian deportations. Beyond these legal proceedings, survivor testimonies became crucial for preserving Holocaust memory. Figures like Primo Levi, Elia Wiesel, Viktor Frankl, and many others wrote influential memoirs that brought the Auschwitz experience to readers worldwide. Their accounts not only documented the atrocities, but explored profound questions about human nature, morality, and survival in extreme conditions. On July 2, 1947, the Polish Parliament established a museum at the site of the former Auschwitz I and Auschwitz II Birkenau camps to commemorate the victims and serve as a warning to future generations. In 1979, the camp complex was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Since 2005, the anniversary of Auschwitz's liberation, January 27th, has been recognized by the United Nations and the European Union as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Commemorative events are held annually on this date. The liberation of Auschwitz not only marked the end of one of history's darkest chapters, but also the beginning of a long, ongoing process of reckoning with its legacy. Through trials, testimonies, education, and commemoration, the world has grappled with understanding and processing the crimes committed there. At the same time, survivors and their descendants have worked to rebuild their lives, though many carried the physical and psychological scars of their experience to the grave. As Auschwitz survivor and writer Primo Levi stated, "The true horrors of Auschwitz will never be fully known because those who saw the Gorgon did not return to tell about it or returned mute. Those who survived to tell their stories experienced milder versions of the horror, as those who suffered the worst did not live." Studying Auschwitz remains vital today, not just as a historical record of past atrocities, but as a warning about humanity's capacity for systematic cruelty when demonizing the other becomes state policy. As Holocaust scholar Deborah Lipstadt noted, the Holocaust didn't begin with gas chambers, it began with words. Extermination camps like Auschwitz represent the endpoint of a process that started with prejudice and discrimination, advanced through dehumanization and segregation, and culminated in industrialized genocide. In the more than 75 years since its liberation, Auschwitz has emerged as the primary symbol of the Holocaust and, more broadly, of human capacity for both evil and resilience in the most extreme circumstances. Its history reminds us of civilization's fragility and the need for constant vigilance against the return of intolerance and fascism that made such horror possible. As Elie Wiesel wrote, to forget the dead would be to kill them a second time. The story of Auschwitz, though spanning less than 5 years, saw the death of over 1 million people and the destruction of millions more lives. Telling this story is our way of remembering the lives lost and aims to be a tribute to the innocent victims of a criminal regime. Their sacrifice will never be forgotten. If this story inspired you, challenged you, or made you see World War II in a new light, it would be an honor to have you in our community. Subscribing isn't just a click. It's supporting more powerful stories, more forgotten voices, and more truth from the past. So, if you believe these stories matter, click subscribe and let's keep building this journey together. And don't forget to leave a comment. We read them all and love hearing your thoughts. Until next time, keep exploring history with Epic War. Keep asking questions. Keep seeking the truth.